we're on a journey. I think the temptation is always to moan about where we've got to, or to wish that we've got further. But we have made progress, right, over the last, over a relatively short period in the big scheme of things. Quite a lot of progress has been made. I mean, I suppose what stands out for you, in terms of, you've gone through several negotiations now. Try to put the latest one in that kind of context. How is it the same? How does it differ from previous conversations, previous devolution deals that you've struck for Greater Manchester?
Well, it's the first that I've struck, Andrew. So I don't have the ability to compare with the ones that were done in the middle part of the last decade. Obviously, I was kind of a Greater Manchester MP at the time, so I kind of heard some of the way in which that was done. I think this process, from what I know about the previous experiences, was the best that we've had. It was a constructive process. In a time when politics can feel quite polarized, it's amazing how this is an area of agreement and an area where we can make progress with the government. I would say about 80 to 90%. I mean, people might differ on precisely what number they would put on it, but 80 to 90% of the things we asked for, we got. I mean, past experience says to me that the language in a devolution deal doesn't always translate into everything that you thought you had. I remember coming in as mayor in 2017, getting quite excited about rail station devolution and getting ready to get my hands on all these stations that we could build housing around or housing on top of, and being told by Chris Grayling that he unilaterally decided to cancel rail station devolution, which was kind of a bit of a sobering experience. But the goodwill was there, though, and I have paid public tribute to Michael Gove, but he deserves it because he set out to deliver a deepening of English devolution. He did it, and I think it will improve the governance of the country in the long run, when hopefully other parts of England get the same powers as we very much want them to have.
Yeah, and we'll get onto this, a bit of the detail about the deals, and you can say a little bit more about that. But just on that point, I mean, you have very generously been, said in lots of different places that a special mention should be given to the current Secretary of State. I mean, how much do you think this sort of agenda relies on, individuals like Michael Gove, as opposed to the sort of a bigger, broader institutional setting? If he wasn't there, or if a new Secretary of State emerges at some point, should we worry, or do you think it's locked in now to the way that government kind of thinks about these sorts of things? A big question, but individuals and institutions, we should just be mindful a bit of that, right?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and I can only give you a sort of a gut feeling in answer to it, rather than a sort of a completely evidence-based analysis. But my gut feeling is that it's irreversible now. I think if you go back to the pre-pandemic period, the pandemic, when some of the debates that colleagues might remember me having with the government in that period, I don't think there was a sense necessarily that it was irreversible. There was a feeling that things could be taken back. I don't think we are in that place now. I think if you look at the skyline of Manchester city centre, that tells its own story, doesn't it, about how this city has moved forward in the last decade. Previously under Sir Howard and Sir Richard, but more recently under Mayor Paul Dennett, Bev Craig as new leader of Manchester City Council, and myself. This is an ongoing success story, I'd like to say, and obviously we see similar progress in the West Midlands and in Liverpool and Leeds and elsewhere. So this is working. My experience in this negotiation, without getting, I will remain slightly diplomatic here. I'll have to be careful. Where we were asking for things on kind of long-held ambitions, technical education being kind of right up there, where in the past we'd kind of found it hard to move it forward. I think the number of allies we had in the system seemed to have grown significantly, is the way I would put it. And I think that's true of all of the policy issues, really. All of a sudden, there are more influential voices. Those they have multiplied through the civil service and more broadly into the think tanks and elsewhere. And it's just yourselves. You were on your own, not on your own, but there wasn't as many of you as we would have wanted years ago, but now you're joined by a lot more voices that are saying no, this actually makes a more functional country. And I would say, in a time when things are quite polarized, the layer of devolution, the layer of governance represented by combined authorities, is quickly becoming the most functional layer of our system at the moment. The place first rather than party first approach is definitely what Andy Street is operating in the West Midlands. It's what Tracy's doing. It's what Steve's doing. It's what I'm doing. And I think that there is something really important for the country in that, isn't there? That we're creating a kind of a place where we can focus on where we agree rather than where we disagree, whereas Westminster too often focus on where they disagree, rather than where they agree. And I kind of feel that the civil service and others, and particularly the private sector, I think the private sector were there for some time actually, but their voice has been very influential. The business voice has been really important, I think, in driving us to the point that we've now reached. Yeah,
that's a great point. And I should have said at the start, if you've got questions for Andy, just put them into the Q&A. We've got one already, and after we've had a bit of a chat, I'll introduce some of those questions as well. And just on that party political consensus point at the sort of place level, local level, does that apply also within Greater Manchester? Because obviously you've got a lot of Labour MPs, but actually you've got quite a few Conservative MPs as well. To the way that they think about the mayoralty, is that the same party consensus, do you think?
I think there's a difference between the councils and members of Parliament, I would say. So if you think about the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, it is a three-party administration now, with Mark Hunter and Martin Cox working alongside myself and the 8 Labour leaders. Even though we deal with difficult issues, we deal with those issues in quite a pragmatic, evidence-based way, and a very, very, I would say, very productive sort of way. And that's why I call this a functional tier, and we really mustn't lose that. We must not let the sort of polarized politics of the times really creep in and sort of stop the combined authorities working in that place first rather than party first way. I think members of Parliament from all sides actually probably have different views about devolution. There was a call in this process, Andrew, for more accountability, but it was one I was very happy to take on board. And in fact, I suggested strengthening it. There was a call for a sort of an accountability process. Well, I said, well, if we're going to get a single settlement like Wales and Scotland, we'll give us a grand committee in Parliament like Wales and Scotland. I'd more than happily accept that level of scrutiny. So, members of Parliament are in different places on it, but that call for accountability is not one that we fear. And, I hope actually, as MPs get more experience of this, it's not about kind of removing MPs' ability to influence things. MPs should be able to hold national government to account, but they should be able to hold combined authority government to account and local government to account. It's about ensuring that they've got the right level of voice in all of those situations. So, I like to think this is an area where there's just a growing consensus about the way forward. And I hope the government are proud of the trailblazer deals. We're certainly proud of it from our side, and I hope they are too.
Yeah, well, they certainly should be. I think in a sense of if you think about the levelling up white paper, published over 12 months ago, and then you think about some of the announcements in there, the trailblazers were one of the more eye-catching bits in there. And yes, it's taken us longer than we would ideally want to get to the deal signing stage, and then obviously his implementation. So there is something material there for the government to feel good about, as well as obviously yourselves and the West Midlands as well, which I think is important. All sides need to feel like progress can be made and that deals can be struck, or activities can be happening on the ground.
Definitely. I mean, let's take some of the headline commitments in the white paper, Andrew. So there was one around London-style public transport outside of London by 2030. We would say we're the only part of England that can deliver that because of the decision to put buses under public control, because that allows you to create the single fare box that London has got. And very encouragingly in the Trailblazer, we made the pitch, and we had to make a kind of persuasive case, but it was listened to have our version of TfL overground, so TFGM overground or B network overground, where we're going to bring some of the more standalone commuter railway lines into the B network, into the CAPS London style system. The one caveat I would say is you've got a Trailblazer, but outside of the Trailblazer, you're going to have the funding support to deliver that. And I think there is still an ongoing, so there are issues outside of the Trailblazer that also need to be considered. So, for instance, London is the only part of the country that has recovery funding agreed from the pandemic, whereas we're all struggling with that issue at the moment. So I think the Trailblazer is really good as far as it goes. But if you really want to deliver the white paper ambitions, and I've mentioned one, I think there needs to be a commitment that goes beyond the Trailblazer as well, if you like, in terms of plotting that course forward.
And are you a little bit worried there, and in a sense that the power and the responsibility gets given to you? I mean, buses is a good example, right? You're going to take over, the bus system and to franchise it and bring it back under your influence and control. But obviously, and this applies in London as well, it needs an ongoing subsidy of wherever that subsidy comes from. Are you a little bit worried that some of those Trailblazer powers won't come with the requisite investment or expenditure?
Well, it's just a case that it feels we've got to continue to make, because we don't yet have that certainty that it will be there. But we hear in the news against we saw the OECD figures, didn't we, yesterday? And here we are again. I heard on the radio this morning we're having a debate about Britain's productivity problem. Well, why does Britain have a productivity problem? There's a whole host of reasons. One of them, though, is because we have a public transport problem. And so, if you want growth, and if you want to see growth in the regions outside of London, you have to back public transport to lift productivity and then create a more investable economy. There's no two ways about it. And so I kind of feel, we've hit a point in this journey where I think we do know what works now. We're seeing the benefits of the inward investment that comes from putting out a clear vision and a clear way forward. But if Whitehall does its usual thing of faltering on that journey, and all of a sudden, there's a key bit of enabling funding that's not there, then that could disrupt the success story that's building here. So I guess it's about Whitehall beginning to work differently with what it's created. The thing about what I'm doing, Andrew, which is different to Westminster, and I think this is why it's attractive to business, is because we are able here on a three-party basis to put forward a 2038 vision for our city region. And we're not changing from it. This is about a net zero city region where we've got good homes, good transport, good work, strong inward investment, a city region where we're taking more control over technical education. And maybe we can come to that, because it's in many ways the big breakthrough of this Trailblazer deal. Our journey is pretty clear. We've got a spatial plan to underpin it that hopefully soon will be fully approved. We've got the zones where we know we want to prioritize. We've got the plan for public transport. It's there. It's all there. And the country doesn't work on that long-term basis, but we are. And hence, we're really becoming attractive to people as a place to invest because of that level of stability. The follow-on point then is you've got to put forward the long-term funding, haven't you, to deliver that. To be fair to the government, in the spring budget, they did commit to city region sustainable transport settlement funding for a second 5-year period, and they put a £9 billion price tag alongside it. That says to me that Whitehall is beginning to sort of adjust its way of working to fit with the long-term approach being taken by combined authorities. And I hope I'm right that that's a really positive straw in the wind, but it needs to be matched on the revenue front as well, and, on the housing front, and, across the board, to be honest. And
it would suggest, I sort of said this after, it suggests, at least to me, I'm interested, it also suggests, I think, that the government, maybe the Treasury, recognises the importance. Doesn't mean that other places don't have a different, have roles, but it recognises the significant and different role that big urban areas like Greater Manchester like, West Midlands have in the national economy. I mean, they are not the same as small places or district places. Not saying they're better, we're just saying they're different. And they, and I think there's an increasing recognition in government that, that we need to prioritize the performance improvement in those places in order to think about how we improve the Great Manchester economy, but actually the national economy, which, as you touched on, we definitely need to do as well. Would you agree with that?
I completely agree, and it's the argument that you and your organisation have made for years, that cities are the engine of the modern economy. They're the place where you will find the innovation, the new economy, the new industry. The universities and everything they bring to this debate. So yeah, it absolutely is happening. And I've just been in the US recently, and if you go there, you see kind of insurgent cities that are just experiencing really strong growth. And it's kind of exciting to see. And I've long said that, British cities are almost in danger of being kind of left behind in this race, because we haven't got that bottom-up enabling potential to make our cities the sort of drivers of growth. But it feels finally like we're beginning to get some of that. I think the exciting news from Greater Manchester is, and this benefits town as well, because once you get a city that's really firing on all cylinders, as we think ours is, it starts to have the effect of lifting Stockport and Rochdale and Farnworth and all kinds of places where we've got regeneration taking place. Because as if you like, there's kind of new graduate jobs appearing in those places. 20, 30 somethings are all of a sudden saying, as I pick up that they are in London, well, why would I want to live at the end of the Piccadilly line when I could be 10 or 15 minutes outside of Manchester city centre for a home that's half of the cost or whatever? Understandably, some of them are saying, okay, well, actually, I do want to go up there and have a graduate job there, but live close to the city and have more money in my pocket. And hence, people are beginning to look at Stockport as a place to live, Rochdale as a place to live. And so city and town are becoming united in this endeavour. And I think that helpfully moves us beyond a sort of divide that was potentially holding some of the devolution debate back.
Yeah, it did. It made me smile. I think it was earlier this week I read, I can't remember in which newspaper, there was a reference comparing Stockport to Berlin, I think was so Stockport is the new Berlin, which was, made me smile, because somewhere
the former leader of Stockport Council.
Somewhere has to be the new Berlin, right? I mean, because Berlin is now passé, so somewhere else. So why not Stockport, I suppose? I don't know.
Well, exactly. But the former leader of Stockport Council, Elise Wilson, used to say that Stockport is Brooklyn to Manchester's Manhattan.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, well, that's maybe even a better comparison. Let's look at just talk a little bit about some of the specifics of the deal itself. So we'll come to technical education in a second, Andy, but can you say, I mean, obviously detail to be determined, etc., but can you say a little bit about the single settlement? Because I think that is, that will require not only you, the GM and the combined authority, to work differently, but it'll also certainly require government to kind of change the way it thinks about doing spending reviews and all the rest of it. So it's a big thing on both sides. Just say a little bit more about what the spending settlement or the single settlement is, and why do you think it's a big thing for the area? And then we'll get on to technical education as well.
Yeah, so there's two things to say on that, Andrew. So one is, currently the amount of work goes in to bidding to the individual departments for those funding streams that eventually come down to this level. Don't underestimate it. There's a huge amount that has to go into that, and sometimes work goes in and then no funding appears, and we had that with the first iteration of local investment zones under the previous Prime Minister. So when you've got 150 separate funding streams, which is what we currently have, then you're going to have delay, aren't you, in terms of and then complexity on the other side of it. Once you've got the funding, you're going to have a situation where you have to go back and account to each individual department. All of it delays delivery, and I think we've got to get into the business of growth in a much more serious way, haven't we? In terms of housing growth, linking it to public transport, reshaping places, moving more quickly, being able to have different conversations with potential inward investors, and the single settlement will allow for all of that, and to be able to, to prioritize things differently rather than being trapped in, those straitjackets of those different funding settlements. So it is exciting. It is a vote of confidence in Greater Manchester, but it's the government is right to take it, because I always say this, from my experience, national government departments waste more money than local government, and I say that as somebody having come out of national government and into this world. National government has been wrong for many years to be so wary of local government. I think it should trust it more. It's closer to the ground. Money gets spent better closer to the ground, and you get less waste from the sort of the Whitehall merry-go-round. If a minister comes in and says, "Oh, this is my pet project now, and this is going to be the important thing, and everyone needs to dance to this tune," and then they're out the door because of a reshuffle, and then it's something, you get waste from that way of working. I do think Whitehall needs to continue to look at itself in the mirror on that point of view. Local government, in my experience, wastes quite little actually, and it could actually speed up delivery significantly if more places were moved to a more flexible single settlement arrangement of the kind that we're hopefully going to.
And so, notwithstanding impending general elections, etc., so is the idea then that as we move into the next spending review period, then GM would be regarded as and thought about and play a similar role in the spending review process as the departments currently do? Is that how you envisage it working?
Yes, that's what I'm led to believe will be the case, and we've already had an indication, Andrew, that the next phase of the CRSTS, City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, from 27 to 2032 would be in the single settlement. So that's encouraging. I think we've had a similar indication around retrofit funding. So I pluck those two things out. Why? Because if you could start linking net zero housing to net zero public transport, you are then really in the business, aren't you, of reshaping places in a future facing way, and placemaking that is quite exciting, to be honest. So that is what I'm led to believe will be possible. We also got the ability to have more control over the affordable housing programme. At the moment, only 5 of our local authorities can access funding to build social housing. It will soon be all 10. I just think all of those things, that greater flexibility opens up so many possibilities that weren't available to us before. So, it isn't just a technical change. I think it's a really clever change on the government's part, and we're already thinking now about how we will utilise it as our spatial plan comes through. It's currently has been in the inquiry stage, hopefully soon to be adopted. If you think about our ambitions about the north of our city region, so long held ambition to close Greater Manchester's north-south divide. Yeah. There's a big scheme developing called Atom Valley, which Rochdale and Bury and Oldham are all connected to. If we can start then linking, high-end employment to truly affordable net zero homes, and public transport coming up, serving all of it, then you're really in business then, aren't you, in terms of true levelling up? Because true levelling up can only happen on that kind of strategic level.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think if which I'm sure we will, but making the single settlement sort of reality, and then testing it out and see what that means. As I say, I think will be a significant moment in the devolution journey that that the country is on. But I also think not just for your place or for the places that get it, but actually for government itself, because I think that is a substantive milestone in actually reframing and reconfiguring how government works, which in fairness, again, the Secretary of State and those involved in the Levelling Up white paper recognised that it was about how government works that needs to be changed, as well as what we devolve. And I think that would be a significant moment. I
think the thing I was just saying, Andrew, is one of there's many reasons why Whitehall doesn't work as well as it should. I mean, one is the fact that it's 2 silo based, and you don't get that joined up thinking. But another is the short-term nature of funding. It's very difficult for a government to take a long-term perspective on place, isn't it, from that level, given the way Whitehall works. But if we can do that and create that long-term direction, then the governments all departments can understand the long-term direction and then understand what their role in supporting it is. I do think it produces more functional governance that the UK has long needed, and more bottom-up delivery, which also I think drives more successful delivery as well.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's go on to technical education, or that again. This has been a priority for you, since you became mayor, and you've had bits and pieces along the way. Now is another sort of substantive step. Just say a little bit more about what the latest deal includes, and then how does that relate to previous deals, and therefore what does that leave you with now in the sort of technical education post-16 education space?
Well, this was the single biggest piece in the Greater Manchester Devolution jigsaw, and was becoming more and more of a problem in that, if you speak to a potential investor now, they just want to know about talent and skills. That's what, it's 1, 2, and 3 on their list. And we weren't able to give as strong answers as we needed to. So if you just think about it from that inward investment point of view, what we had was the adult education budget, elements of the DWP work programme, but not anything coherent across all of it. And what the Devolution Trailblazer does is give us control of post-19 commissioning and co-control with the Department for Education over 16 to 19. And for me, it's that second bit that I find really, really exciting. Because in making the case, I said to the government, we could become the country's first integrated technical education system, where as a Greater Manchester community, we articulate the needs of our economy and our labour market to the technical education system. And that way round, if you're kind of doing it that way, it means the pathways that we create are likely to lead to really good jobs for our young people, but employers will also have more confidence that the system can actually meet their skills. Therefore, they will have more confidence to invest. So I'm really, really excited by this. It's about really delivering on that vision of parity between academic and technical education. The university route is clear, but let's have the same for kids who are not on the university route. I'm on at the moment. I've got my team on with really kind of pulling together what does an integrated technical education system look like in Greater Manchester, and we'll say more after the local elections in May about this. In some ways, Andrew, what I want to do is do what I did with public transport a few years ago, where we kind of first put out our version of the tube map. People called it the Death Star. I don't know if you remember this, but we had a very future-looking sort of map.
I did.
Everybody thought we were going to point it at London, I think, and launch some sort of aggressive act. I think
people thought you were already pointing it at London. I mean, it
wasn't the case.
I'll take that back. That's a slightly unfair point.
Not at all. We love London. You know that. And we're just simply the North Pole to the South Pole, and we're trying to follow a lot of what London has done. But on this issue, I actually think we're trying to set a new template for the country, which is an integrated Greater Manchester technical education system, where we develop new pathways for young people, possibly around T levels, or I would say likely around T levels, that link very much to the high quality jobs that there are in the Greater Manchester economy. So I'm thinking of a cyber T level, content creation T level. You could keep going on, a software development T level, coding, retrofit T level, you name it. And really working with industry players to ensure the content of those qualifications is right, that the work placements are there, because T levels require a work placement. There still will be a role for other qualifications, of course, because not every 16-year-old is ready to go straight to a T level. But I think if you build a system that says, you've got this route going to university, which is, here's what you're going to do, and here's the A levels, or there's this route towards technical education, here's the T levels, and here's the work placements. I think we can do something to raise aspiration for those not on the university route that we've never managed to do as a country before. And I get really excited about that. I'm thinking about a Manchester baccalaureate, an MBAC, and we'll say more about that in due course, but it's got the potential to be really exciting.
And the powers and the sort of the role and the responsibilities that you currently got, Andy, I mean, how close to developing and then I suppose implementing an integrated training system, how close can you get with what you've currently got? And I suppose, are there bits of the jigsaw that still need to be plugged in or, negotiated further? I mean, how do you think about that where you currently are?
Yeah, there's always things to be negotiated further, and we will want to discuss with the DFE how we bring together this board at the Greater Manchester level to oversee the system. We'll obviously maybe have different views that we'll have to take on board, and but we'll do that. But the simple idea here is that there's a paradigm shift from the current situation where it is so bottom up as to be quite difficult for businesses to work with and difficult for young people to understand, to a point where it's Greater Manchester articulating to our colleges that this is the needs of the labour market and the economy, and therefore we need to build places around the level of need, if you like, in the economy. And that is a paradigm shift, if you like, going from where we are today to, as a GM system, articulating clearly what we need. Now, the really good thing is it's not all about powers from Whitehall, because our 9 FE colleges have been working as a group for some time. So they are working as a collaborative system. So that is a really important building block in all of this. But putting the board on top of that, I don't think it needs not necessarily major legislative change. It just requires an alignment from everybody in the system to say, right, we're going to give this system a go. So it can't all come in straight away, but I have got my eye on September 24, that academic intake as being kind of at the point where we would really want to see an expansion of a technical education system offering high quality T levels with industry partners lined up all behind those T levels. That's what I've got in mind, Andrew, and that's what I'm building towards. And I personally think that could be a very exciting template for English devolution beyond Greater Manchester.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I'll come on to your sort of broader thoughts about devolution and what you're doing there and what the implications that might have for other places. The other area, you touched on it already, but in terms of transport, Andy, I mean, obviously this is a big year, right? I mean, new routes. The B network is about literally to become real in a sense in some places, and then rolled out over time. What's in the new settlement that that enhances and allows you to go further on your transport aspirations?
So I'll say what's in and then what wasn't in, because we didn't get everything, and maybe you never do, but it's just important to say where we still feel we need to go further. In terms of what's in, we have now got the kind of foundations of an agreement to bring rail into the B network by 2030. So to go back to what I said earlier, to deliver London-style integrated transport outside of London by the end of this decade. And what that means is it's those standalone lines that are typical GM commuter lines. So they're kind of, they're not the pan-northern lines. It's the line from Buxton into our city centre or Southport into our city centre. Yeah. It's about bringing those into the B network cap, so that if you tap in Southport or tap in Buxton, you're tapping into the Greater Manchester system. And then you'll benefit from the cap on bus and tram travel once you arrive in the city centre. And that's a game changer if you think about modal shift and car usage across the north. At the moment, there is no such incentive, and therefore too many people are in their cars. But if we have that approach, I think it'll be a very, very different offer to commuters than the one that we've currently got. It's our version of TfL Overground, effectively. Where there's a sort of an integrated fares and ticketing offer, and a much more attractive financial offer from car transport. So that's in. More detail to be fleshed out, working with the GBR transition team, but we're really in positive conversations with them. And, there's lots of good progress to report there. But it does mean, to put it in practical terms, by 2030, people inside our borders or outside our borders in the places that are covered would be able to tap in on bus, bike, tram and train and be in the Greater Manchester cab system, which, is finally the promised land, really, as far as we're concerned, with regard to transport. In terms of what's not in, a more sort of everyday issue, if you like, but we still feel it's important to be able to say to our residents that we are guaranteeing standards on all forms of transport and public transport, and this is why we still wish to have the power to end out of area working when it comes to private hire, and we were not successful in that in this negotiation. There is language in the trailblazer around looking at options with Greater Manchester, but we didn't land what we wanted to, which is to say that we should have a system where it's the Greater Manchester 10 councils that are setting an agreed standard across our city region, and therefore we can guarantee to our residents standards of safety and vehicle standards, etc. And we're still not there yet, but we actually see that as part of an integrated public transport system, and we'll keep working at that one.
Brilliant. And I mean, there's quite a bit in the text around the trailblazers around accountability and governance and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, you touched on that a little bit, Andy. I'd be interested in we've had quite a few questions on that. Be interested in your sort of thoughts on that, as much as, where's that coming from? Why do you think there's such an emphasis on that? How much of that is, how much of that is coming from your side, as it were? How much of that is coming from government's side? I suppose related to that, I'd be interested in your thoughts, less about, you and what you do on a daily basis, but, if this stuff happens, the mayoral model in Greater Manchester and the combined authority, that would be quite a significantly different institution, let's say in a few years' time than it was back in 17 when you were first elected. I'd be interested in how you see that sort of change. What happens along the way, and how does the institution itself need to improve or develop or to strengthen? So a lot in there, but I'm just interested in your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I think the accountability call is largely coming from members of Parliament, because we do have a single overview and scrutiny committee at the Greater Manchester level, which is really doing its job. We've recently changed it and strengthened it. It's a remunerated position for the councillors that are on it. We have a police accountability meeting that we've set up following some of the challenges that GMP had. That's also doing its job. So I think in terms of internally, I think the accountability arrangements are strong and getting stronger. But there was a call from MPs. I guess you can understand if these were functions that they were challenging ministers on, if they're suddenly more at the GM level, it's a legitimate call to say, well, where's our ability to hold that use of power to account? What I would say to my former colleagues in Parliament is I feel much more accountable in this role than I ever did when I was inside the Westminster bubble,
exactly.
to be honest.
I feel like the bar, I mean, maybe I'm biased like you, so let's just put those out there. I feel like the bar on accountability is considerably higher, for you and for Andy in the West Mids than it is for some of our MP and Whitehall colleagues. Or am I being unfair on that or not?
No, I don't think so. And I can speak from real experience.
Well, exactly. You've been on both sides, right? So
I mean,
I'm just a casual observer. So
it's the nature of a mayoral role, isn't it? If you are living in a city region where governance has been quite disjointed, and public transport is deregulated or privatized, and who do you complain to?
Yeah.
Is it a councillor? Is it an MP? So I think people have lived in this world, but the experience of getting a mayor is all of a sudden, hang on a minute, we've got one bloke or one woman to complain to here.
Yeah.
Right, they can have everything. And I remember the shock to my system in the early days of my kind of Twitter every day. I've been quite manageable and, fairly pedestrian when I was an MP, and all of a sudden, boom, the weather, the airport.
Yes. What are you doing about the weather, man?
The Arndale Centre opening hours. I mean, you name it. I mean, it was, City and United and how they were playing, and I don't know. It literally, it could be, it was and is anything at times. And, but I understand it, because people want accountability, don't they? People want services to be run for them. And when you give somebody a mayor, they've got somebody to complain to. And whether I've got the powers or if I haven't, I can still do something to get some accountability for them. So that's how the system works. And I don't think MPs fully have understood that yet. And it's the experience of becoming a mayor, I think, really brings that home to you. And I've tried not to, I do a hot seat on BBC Manchester every week. And because I don't do a surgery like an MP does, but I do make myself available in that way to have direct conversations with the public. And it's to BBC Manchester's credit that they've operated that with Mike Sweeney, who hosts this every week with me. So yeah, I do feel that the accountability is there, but I accept that parliamentary accountability is a different thing. And, if more of that's needed, I'm not going to stand in its way. And a grand committee of the House for Greater Manchester would be a really good thing, because actually it would make Parliament focus more on the issues of the regions than perhaps it does ordinarily. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a journey, Andrew, isn't it? The accountability issue.
Do you think then, I don't know, do you think that's partly about, they're relatively new things, mayors like you, obviously we've had mayors of different persuasions at, different jurisdictions, but, the mayors that we've got, yourself and others, they're relatively new into the British Constitution. Seems to me in part, we're not quite sure how to deal with them yet. We don't quite know where they fit. We don't quite know how to hold them accountable. We don't really know how they relate to local government or to central government. So we're trying some of this stuff out. I don't know, is that part of it as well? So is there sort of a trial and error process or not?
Oh, to a degree, but I think it's more positive than that. I think we have increasingly become, the GMCA is quite a mature organisation now. It's changed a lot in the time I've been here, and it was changing when I arrived. It's a significant player, and it's full of people who were in local government or in national government. It's an interesting place, Andrew, because it's where at times the system meets each other. They don't meet each other when they're just a kind of Whitehall department sort of shouting to a council via an email, but they do meet here. And I often, there's often younger civil servants who come here on secondment, and that's a really good thing. And the more that people come out and see it and feel it, I think the trust has grown, and they've seen that we can actually join the dots between we can do things that they can't. And therefore we've got a level of functionality that Whitehall doesn't have. So I like to think that people have, as I said before, it feels to me now there's a majority of people in Whitehall who understand that and have accepted it. And that's a really positive thing. And sometimes I can sound like an arch critic of theirs. Well, let me be positive actually and say, no, I've picked up recently that more and more people are saying, okay, we can see now what's being done here, and we can see how this adds something to the way the country is run. And I think those people outweigh now the kind of naysayers who perhaps were in the majority going back to George Osborne's time, where he had to drive things through, even though there was a majority of people who didn't like the idea of it. I think we've gone beyond that now.
Yeah, no, that's a great Mr. Point. And you said there about that even in your time the institution has changed quite considerably. What you do and what you're responsible has changed over the time. If you think through the next period, dare I say the next term, how do you think the institution and the role of the mayor will evolve and change over that period? Are there certain things that you have in your mind or not?
Oh no, absolutely. And you say it's, I think you were hedging around the issue of a third term. I'll be standing for a third term, and Steve Rotherham will as well. And he and I don't know if you know, but we're writing a book together at the moment. Because
I do. I can't wait.
Yeah, well,
when will it be published?
Well, early next year. It will obviously inform the next mayoral election. But we left Westminster together to build this. We'd worked together on Hillsborough and other issues, and we just got to the end of the line and thought, well, this system on its own will never hear our voice, the voice of the North, in the way that we want it to. Something new is needed, and this was our something new. And we would say, I think we both feel quite upbeat about the extent to which this is rebalancing things in a good way, in a healthy way. So we're really excited about it now. Actually, it feels like we're getting into the sort of the devolution proper that we wanted to see. In terms of what will it mean in the third term, well, the B network will be delivered by the 5th of January 2025. Well, certainly its first phase will. That's integrating bus, tram, and bike. And then as I said to you before, want to see the emergence then of an integrated technical education system alongside it. I mean, just think what that means for this city region. We're going to be a very really attractive place to invest. We already are, but we'll be even more so. And that is something that is this. These are the unfinished pieces of the Greater Manchester jigsaw, aren't they? While we are world class in many respects, I don't think anyone would say here that we have been in transport and we've needed to up our game, and that's coming through now. And then when we add skills into that mix, I think in the second part of this decade that we're in, Greater Manchester is genuinely going to be powering on all cylinders. And I think we are going to be, putting up a bit of a challenge to London-centric thinking, because we will be a place where it might be better for people to come and invest. If you want to attract the 20-somethings and the 30-somethings, maybe by then, many more, there's already quite a number of them, but even more will be saying, well, you know what, I'd rather live in Manchester or Greater Manchester and have a home I can afford and, be close to the action and, have a graduate job. This success story, I think, is only really beginning to get rolling, I think. So, why wouldn't I want to be around to sort of see that through? And I think by the end of this decade, I think, the fundamentals of a city region set up for success outside of London will be absolutely in place.
Yeah. And this is a slightly unfair question to you because of the position that you hold, but it reflects, as we have loads of people, hundreds of people on the call, and many of them are in Greater Manchester, but many of them are outside, and people are saying, this is great, but I'm slightly worried about, the rest of the country. What does that mean, for my place relative to, if GM is getting all this stuff, what does that mean? On the one hand, obviously, you are the mayor of Greater Manchester. It's like, that's not your responsibility. I know you do think about these things a lot. So I suppose there's a bigger, broader question about, what's going on in GM and what does that mean for these sorts of issues and the way they get tackled in other parts of the country. I know you've thought about that. It's not just about you only thinking about GM. So your thoughts on that, Annie? I mean, how do we build a story that involves more places and reassures and gives places that responsibility?
Well, my view about that is this journey gets more and more exciting the more that you fill in the missing gaps in Greater Manchester's own jigsaw. But then when you then extend the same to places all around, and including the places that don't have devolution, because then you create a country where we don't all have to go on bended knee to Whitehall. We can start working with each other because we'll have capability and we'll have the ability to do things for ourselves, and that will build a much more powerful delivery function across the country, and it will get us very much in the business of the 21st century economy. If you go around the world, it is cities that are leading change, are driving growth, and in my view, the 21st century economy and society will be built from the bottom up, not imposed in a 20th century way by national government from the top down. I mean, that era has gone, and we need to accept it as a country that era has gone. Of course, there's a huge role for national government in setting the framework and the funding and the regulations and all the rest of it. But actually, the cleverest countries are the ones that are freeing up cities and regions to move as fast as possible to digitalize and decarbonize and all of those things. And I think we're getting into that game, but we still need to be not complacent about how quickly we need to move. We need to move quickly. And so the more that we fill in this map, the more excited I get. When I can pick up the phone to the mayor of Cheshire or whatever the agreement is, that's controversial.
Be careful now. You start naming places,
to throw out there. Being provocative now.
You start naming certain places.
Being provocative, but I also let me put the challenge up to Scotland. I think there's been too much centralisation going on up there. We talk of Westminster centric. Well, Holyrood centric is a bit of a criticism you could make there. So if there was a mayor or provost of Greater Glasgow, that would be a great thing, because myself, Tracy, Steve would be on the phone to that person a lot. So I think it gets more exciting. What I'm saying is, the more that you put this power in at this level, and the more you fill in the map and the jigsaw, it just constantly gets stronger the more that you do that. So I would say to all places, kind of what's not to like here, really. I mean, maybe you don't want a mayor. Well, fine. If this government or the next government relaxes some of those things, just don't get hung up on those parochial debates. Concentrate on what you agree on, and get on this journey, is what I would say, because we want you on this journey with us. We don't want to be the only ones doing this.
No, and again, I'm interested in your reflection on that, on the bigger themes there. And we've got to have them, and they're good things. But does a general election help or hinder what you're trying to do in GM over the next period, Andy? I mean, we're going to have them. They come along. I don't mean as if we should abolish general elections in the country or indeed in Greater Manchester, but we're going to have one. Some of the issues that you talked about, some of the negotiations have obviously been with this particular government. We may have the same government or a different government in the not too near future. How do we think these issues play in a general election?
Well, I wrote something about the general election in the Evening Standard last week, and I'll just reiterate it again. I do, without going into the details, I do worry about a general election campaign that is fought too much in the framing of culture wars and highly divisive, polarizing rhetoric. Overly focused on attack rather than positivity. The country needs a vision now, doesn't it? We've been through a really divisive decade when you think about the Scottish independence referendum, then Brexit, then pandemic, now cost of living. We have to move beyond that and focus on a more positive vision for the country. And I think the two main parties really do need to sort of kind of get into that mode and saying, what are you going to do about housing across all of England? What are you going to do about public transport everywhere? And how can devolution deliver these things more quickly for these places, learning from Greater Manchester, the West Midlands and elsewhere? I mean, that's where the election's got to be for me. And I am worried it's already heading into quite a sort of negative space. I just think the public increasingly are saying to politicians, don't attack each other. Tell me what you are going to do. And I think when you look at how mayors fight elections, we are very much focused on, we don't do that stuff that is the stock in trade of Westminster, because you wouldn't get very far if you did. It's a much more practical, pragmatic space. And I just hope that we have an election campaign that is in a slightly more elevated space, let's say, and is looking at what we can be in the future. What can the north of England be in the future? Well, here's an idea for the election campaign. I think we could be a net exporter of green energy. The north of England the economy of the north of England could be very different if you take opportunities that are in front of us now, before Denmark and Norway and others monopolize offshore wind or whatever else it might be. There's an opportunity now to change the face of the north going forward. And I just would say to them all, this election requires a positive vision for what we can be, as opposed to a sort of really reduced version of sort of the polarized politics of the last decade.
I think that is a fantastic point to finish on. Andy, as always, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I know you're super busy, so I really appreciate you making the time to come and talk to us about these sorts of issues. I'm sure.
Oh, you're welcome, Andrew. And I do mean what I said at the start. We do see what you've done and others have done to make this case. Without your support, we wouldn't have been able to get the trailblazer. But we do thank everybody who's joined the call, who's tuning into this conversation. As I said before, and I really mean this is the most functional part of British politics at the moment, where people are putting place first. You know, it's something that unifies people across the spectrum. And I just think in these dangerous times, we need to focus on what unites us, not what divides us. So please, hopefully some of this has been helpful to you, but please keep building the case for devolution in your area. You know, let's not kind of take the sort of parochial view, or we don't want a mayor, or this, that, or the other. You know, I just think there's a bigger picture here. And, you know, hopefully some of what we're doing in Greater Manchester is showing what that bigger picture can be. Fantastic.
Well, we will certainly we will continue to do what we can to push this agenda. So thank you again for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks everybody.
And thanks everybody for being on the call and all your questions. So until the next time, take care and stay safe. See you later, Andy. Take care.
Cheers, Andrew. Thank you.